Hey everybody, it's Dr. Leith. I'm going to go over personality disorders today. Just a word of caution that this is a fairly dense presentation because we have 10 personality disorders to go over, so definitely take your time with this one. I'll go over what is personality, what are we referring to, and what are those 10 personality disorders. But take a break as needed. I hope everyone is well. I've got some cool examples for many of these. If you have any questions, let me know. And with that, let's dive into personality disorders. Oh boy. Here we go. Oh boy. All right. So, personality disorders. What is personality, right? Well, it's a collection of traits. It's who we are. It's what makes a person uniquely them, right? And so, personality is made up of different traits. And some of you are familiar with this. I'm going to go over the big five, right? Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, also known as OCEAN, right? So you can write these in your notes, just OCEAN, and that'll kind of help give you an idea. And so all personality assessments and the disorders and theories stem from these big five. So, openness to experience focuses on the appreciation of art and beauty, receptive to novel experiences, and then there are the different aspects of openness, right? Fantasy, aesthetics, feelings, right? Being receptive to one's own feelings, right? And feeling them intensely. Actions, ideas, and values, being able to explore and evaluate one's own social, political, and religious values. And these are just little aspects. And for all of this, both the broad openness to experience and then for the facets of it, it's on a spectrum. Everybody has some of this. Some people have a whole lot, most people have a moderate amount, and some people have very little. Right? And that's the easiest way of conceptualizing personality traits. Not yes or no, but how much. Conscientiousness, right, revolves around the idea of organization and perseverance. So competence, right, how one deals with hardship. Order, dutifulness, right? So your conscience, right, doing what's right. Achievement, striving, willing to work hard, right? Driven by goals. Self-discipline and deliberation. And again, think about yourself, think about your family and your friends, your boss, your coworkers, and start labeling, right? I say that facetiously, don't actually do it, but conceptualize the people we work with on a scale of, does this person have order, right? Or how much order do they have? Or is that order uniquely theirs? Are they self-disciplined, right? Do they have that personality trait, and by how much? Extroversion, right? Sociability and where they derive their energy from. So extroversion and introversion, right? You've heard these terms. You've heard it probably in terms of like the Myers-Briggs and things like that. And that extroversion means I love going out, and introversion means I love being alone. It's more accurate to say extroversion is I get energized by being around other people and out and about. And introversion means I get energy from solitude. Someone who's introverted can go out and they can be lively. They can even be the life of the party. It just takes a lot of energy. And then when they go home or when they get tired, they rejuvenate in solitude. That's where they get their energy, and vice versa. The person who is extroverted, they can be alone, but being alone, they kind of get lost. They might feel kind of like, I don't know what to do, idle hands, but when they're with people, they feel energized. So, warmth, gregariousness, assertiveness, activity, excitement seeking, and positive emotions. Again, everybody has some amount of these. It's just there are some people who they're very warm and welcoming, and there are some people who are very not warm and welcoming, right? There are some people who are very assertive, right? Bordering on aggressive. And then there are people who are not. Agreeableness, right? So trust and honesty and compliance, right? So can they be straightforward, meaning they say what they mean, and as opposed to just telling you what you want to hear? Are they being who they are versus trying to fit in? Altruism, modesty, neuroticism, right? The experience of negative emotion. So how much anxiety does a person feel? Angry hostility, ooh. Depression, self-consciousness, impulsiveness, and vulnerability. And so I'm going through these quickly because I just want you to have an idea that when we're talking about personality disorders, we're talking about personality, and personality is built upon these things. And the personality disorders are conceptualized in such a way that there are people who have some of these personality traits to such an extent that it has become toxic, or it's so low that it has become a deficit. Here are the two key ingredients that we see with personality disorders. One is that we see it develop usually in teens, right? I caution people about diagnosing in childhood because kids don't know who they are. Their personality is still developing. It's a function of experience and where they're at and things like that. I'm not saying that it's impossible for some of what we're going to go over to manifest in childhood, but there are so many other confounding explanations for children who are experiencing those symptoms. So usually by the late teens, we start seeing this, and we see it frequently enough and clearly enough to know what we're dealing with. And the other thing is that it's pervasive, right? And remember, we talked about pervasiveness as a necessary ingredient for any diagnosis. Here it's explicitly stated that the person's life, their work, home, school, relationships are all kind of affected by their personality. So we went over the personality traits. Those would have been the facets, right? Personality disorders are collections of those traits that are formed in such a way and with amounts that are either so severely is not the best word, so incredibly high or so incredibly lacking that it makes a problem. And with the personality disorders, it affects this. It affects the trifecta. The person's thoughts, so how they view the world, their feelings, right, how they react to the world, and their behavior, what they do with those thoughts and those feelings. And all three of these things feed together, and you'll see that as we go through each of the personality disorders. So again, think of those traits on a spectrum, on a line of having, does this person have so little of it that it's causing a problem? Do they have so much of it that it's causing a problem? And are they present in such a combination that it forms a personality disorder? 10 disorders, about half of them have been fairly well studied. The other half is missing. It's lacking in research. And I'm kind of going over this just for historical reasons. I'd rather you know it and not need it than the other way around. The DSM clusters these things. They have cluster A, B, and C. Cluster A has paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal. I will invariably mix these up, as will you, right? They couldn't think of a more distinct name. Cluster B, antisocial, borderline, histrionic, and narcissistic, which you've probably heard of antisocial, borderline, and narcissistic. Histrionic might be new to some people. And C, avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive. So let's get in. So paranoid personality disorder. Just like the name suggests, paranoia is a central theme with this person, right? This person would be suspicious of everybody, doesn't trust people, they are easily offended, small mistakes mean something to them, right? So, they go to my infamous Starbucks example, they go to Starbucks, the person spells their name wrong, they did it on purpose, right? They go to dinner, they order their food, they feel like the waiter or waitress is looking at them. I bet they're going to spit in my food. There's fear of exploitation, right? So this is, I kind of have fun explaining these in terms of romantic relationships. This would be someone who, so this person's only interested in me because they want something from me. I'm being used. I don't know what I'm being used for, but I know I'm being used. They find hidden meaning in remarks. Mistakes are deliberate. They are very rigid, right? What they know and what they trust, they're unwilling to waver on. They can be litigious. Want to be self-sufficient because I can't trust anybody, right? And when you're in session, they can appear kind of cold, resistant. What do you think they're thinking as they're talking to you, though, as you're asking questions, right? They're probably thinking, why do you need to know that? Who are you going to tell? You're going to use this against me, aren't you? Right? So paranoia is there. Now, this is different than the delusional paranoia that we talk about, like in terms of schizophrenia. With this, the person is thinking and things that there's nothing that's clearly implausible. There's nothing bizarre or fantastic. It's stuff that can't be proven or unproven, right? So it's, I feel like that guy keeps looking at me. I feel like so-and-so doesn't like me. I can't trust anybody. And those are things that, while we might say, whoa, there's like no justification for it, it does not rise to the magnitude of delusion, nor does it rise to the magnitude to be considered bizarre. Schizoid personality is someone who's very comfortable being by themselves. This is someone who, it's the ultimate loner, right? If I'm this person, I don't want relationships. I don't want to deal with people. I am completely happy and sufficient in my solitude. They can kind of appear with restricted emotional range, and I don't seek any type of relationship, whether it be romantic, friendly, social, or otherwise. So that kind of begs the question, why is this a disorder, or how do they wind up coming to session? And part of it is, it might be that they're being compelled by a family member. It might be that someone said something to them right after an argument. Someone said something, they come in, or they might just come in for everyday problems like, I don't know what I want to do. I'm not happy with my job. I'm not happy with my home life, right? And you are asking questions like, well, do you have friends? Do you have a best friend? What are your relationships like? Typically finding jobs where they can kind of work on their own, right? Because this is someone who doesn't want to interact with people. So jobs that require a lot of social interaction or group work, they may avoid. Relationships are possible, but very rare. Schizotypal, this one is fun. Schizotypal is, there's a lot of magical thinking and eccentricities, and they can have odd mannerisms or eccentric mannerisms, the way they talk. They can be very lively. They can have kind of these fringe beliefs or ideas. They can be really, there's a little bit of paranoia, suspiciousness, superstitions. But when if this person was in a crowd, if you were doing a group project with this person, this would be the one that is thinking way outside the box, right? They're way out there. Their interpretation of things are very different, very passionate about their beliefs. They can believe in things like conspiracies. I said the fringe beliefs. So, the Earth is flat. And if somebody believes that, more power to you. I'm just using it as an example. Someone who says, I can't trust big government and things like that. They're very vocal, loud, and so in relationships, they can take a lot of energy because they kind of tend to soak up a lot of the attention, a lot of the time, the a lot of the spotlight. They have a hard time getting along with others because it's very much a disorder where it's, these are my thoughts and you're wrong if you don't agree with me. So it's difficult. Part of this is difficulty in agreeing to disagree. And they can have just very odd ways of rationalizing or making decisions. So a great example of this, a very unfortunate example, I don't want to make light of it, is Bowe Bergdahl. And I will put a link in Blackboard for y'all, but Bowe Bergdahl was a U.S. military soldier who went to Afghanistan, and he was essentially captured and then became a very lengthy, costly endeavor to rescue him. And the process was that he thought, I don't think we should be in war, and I want to talk to the general. So what I'll do is I'll wander off in Afghanistan, and then that will trigger the Dust One. That'll trigger the SOS for the military. They'll come looking for me, and then I'll get an audience with him. Versus just going through the proper channels to voice your opinion and concerns. So season 2 of the podcast Serial, which is very good, goes in depth about this, but he was diagnosed with schizotypal personality disorder because of the way he envisioned joining the military, how he believed the military does and should act, and his way of decision making was incredibly problematic and cost a few lives. But it's a great example of just sort of, it's not fantastic thinking like we would see with maybe schizophrenia or those delusions, but it is such an out-of-the-box way of thinking of a process that it's very problematic. Moving into cluster B, antisocial personality. All of you have heard this. Now, other terms for antisocial personality include sociopath and psychopath, right? As a professional, I encourage you to stick to the term antisocial personality disorder. Sociopath, that used to be the term because it was antisocial, meaning anti-society. Sociopath was a disorder with society. Psychopath, because we're talking about psychopathic tendencies as opposed to psychotic. Psychotic would be schizophrenia and thought disorders. Psychopathic or psychopath is this. And so another thing before we get into it is that many people will say, I'm antisocial or my kid is antisocial. What they really mean is asocial, right? And I get that. That's a common mistake. Antisocial, when you're talking in terms of clinical work, means disregard for societal norms and the rights of others, right? And so this is what many, especially violent offenders or violent criminals have. This is what the serial killers have had. And those are extreme examples, right? If you Google antisocial personality disorder, you will get the most extreme examples. In childhood or early adolescence, we would see them getting into fights, not really caring. You might be familiar already that conduct disorder is the childhood precursor for antisocial personality. These are people who they lack the red flag here, and the key feature here is the lack of ability to empathize with others. So this person does not know, nor do they care to know, how you feel or how their behavior affects you. They can act recklessly and impulsively. They can kind of con and manipulate people. They can be abusive. This is very common in men and very rare in women, but it can be in women. Before going into examples, it's important to know that even though a lot of the examples online will entail abuse, domestic violence, or interpersonal violence and crime, other antisocial things that are less violent is just someone who uses people. This is someone who, if I don't pay my rent and I get kicked out of my apartment, and then I go spend the night with my friend Jerry, and I stay at his place, and I just kind of keep using him, eating his food, using his resources, staying there until eventually he burns out and kicks me out. And then I go to another friend's house and I burn him out. And then I go to the next person. So it's just a pattern of using people without any regard for how they feel, the social contract, being unable to empathize with the other people. A great example is Dirty John, right? I'm sure everybody or most people have heard of Dirty John. John Michael Meehan. And although that ended very violently, before that, it was an example of someone who just manipulated and used wealthy women, right? He would seduce women, get married to them, and then essentially ransom them to get a divorce. And so that's an example of non-violent antisocial behavior. Symptoms tend to mellow as they get older. There can be a lot of death due to suicide or homicide, right? They get in maybe a little too deep and someone comes out to hit them or to get them. Substance use is common. As an aside, people with antisocial tend to have very high thresholds to get excited. So in terms of drug use, porn, sex, just any behavior to make them feel good, the threshold is very high. So if you look at their behavior, it seems very extreme compared to clients without antisocial. Borderline personality disorder, I think it is really fascinating. Just by happenstance, I have wound up spending a lot of my career working with borderline. Borderline is notoriously diagnosed in women and very rarely in men, but it does happen. So antisocial, mostly men, borderline, mostly women, but it's not exclusive to either sex. And borderline is the key feature here is very extreme ups and downs, right? It's I love you and then I hate you. I hate you, don't leave me. And so there is a very intense fear of abandonment or invalidation. And so what typically happens is this person will, they fall in love with somebody, they start a relationship, and after one date, I've met my soulmate, I love them, they're wonderful, and then that person does some small thing, like cancels a coffee date or doesn't text back. And this person says, I hate them. How dare they cancel on me? How dare they not text me back? I'm important. And so they go from one extreme to the other. Behaviorally, what happens is they're very impulsive. So what they do is they might then start to just explode on the other person, or they might self-harm and say, look what you made me do. Right? So it's very hot and cold, lots of non-suicidal self-injury, so self-harming, lots of parasuicide attempts, so I'm making it look like I'm attempting suicide. Lots of ups and downs. This will manifest in your relationship with them. And typically the pattern is with someone with borderline personality is they'll meet with you and say, you are such a great counselor. I love you so much. You're so much better than the last guy. The last guy was awful, just the worst. And then one day you'll have to reschedule your appointment with this client, and they're going to say, how dare you? You don't care if I'm alive or dead. You never cared about me. You just want to get my copays. And rinse, wash, repeat. They then go to the next family or to the next therapist or counselor, whoever. Lots of ups and downs. It gets typically confused with bipolar, right? Because when they're agitated, when they're up, it can look like a manic episode. And I see that a lot, that especially when someone with borderline attempts suicide or self-harms and goes to a hospital, they get diagnosed with bipolar because they're real amped up, and that emergency room physician will say it's a manic episode. They medicate, send them off. Then they start medication for bipolar. It doesn't work because it's not bipolar. And so it gets confused a lot. Borderline can be very taxing to work with, but when you approach it and understand that they are coming from a place of, I have been hurt and I don't want to be hurt again, then it makes a lot more sense. Nearly everybody, there's such a high correlation between borderline and trauma that you have to promise me, if you think you're working with somebody who has borderline or who comes in with borderline, that you'll do an assessment for trauma. I cannot think of a client that I've worked with borderline. And again, I just through happenstance have wound up working quite a bit with borderline. I cannot think of an instance where there was not some past trauma. And again, remember from the trauma discussion, there's those two types of trauma. There's the big trauma, like a sexual assault and domestic violence and child abuse. And then there is the type 2 trauma, the complex one, right, where the person was maybe shamed or invalidated, bullied, manipulated to such an extent that it's traumatic. Nearly everybody has had one of those two types of trauma. They were either survivors of a type 1 trauma, or they were intensely bullied in childhood, or they grew up with parents who were intensely manipulative. The mother from the movie Mommy Dearest, right? No more wire hangers. That is an example of borderline. I think the movie Single White Female is borderline. The preferred treatment for borderline is dialectical behavior therapy. Works wonderfully with it. What I have found that works really well with borderline is understanding, okay, you are really scared of getting hurt. And you're so scared that the person will act or will become volatile. It is very scary for them. And they're very emotionally sensitive. It's kind of like having a sunburn. If I put my hand on your back, that's my hand slapping my desk. If you don't have a sunburn, that probably doesn't hurt too much. If you have a sunburn and I do that, it hurts a whole lot. A person with borderline, they have the sunburn. And so when you ignore them or slight them, it triggers all this stuff of, I'm not good enough, I'm being invalidated. And they don't know what to do with those intense emotions. So in session, we're working on emotion regulation, distress tolerance, relationships, and things like that. It has a really negative reputation in mental health, where people say things like, how many people with borderline should you have on your caseload? 0. Run away. They're all just firecrackers. It's very hard. They're hurt and they're scared and they don't like how they feel. And so giving them that space and understanding of, I get it, you were hurt and you're afraid you're going to get hurt. Now we just got to find a way to manage your relationships and that fear at the same time, really makes for a more conducive counseling relationship and process. Histrionic. This is one of the less researched ones. Histrionic, like hysterical, right? So this is someone who is very attention-seeking, right? So the pattern is high energy, look at me, look at me, look at me. I want everybody's attention. I want to be center stage, extravagant, eccentric. And so in conversations, I want it focused on me, and I might be very elaborate with my body movements and with what I'm saying and my tone. I can be provocative or seductive, right? So I'm looking for attention and approval. And this can lead to some clients maybe being so seductive that they're kind of putting themselves out there to be used sexually and things like that. They will kind of mold themselves to fit into different groups, right? So think of high school with all the different cliques. So this person is kind of a chameleon, can kind of go from one group to the next group and kind of fit in, or will mold themselves to fit in with the band people, the athletes, the skater kids, right? When they're upset, they can kind of have what looks like temper tantrums. And because they're looking for approval, they can kind of get pulled in the wrong direction, right? They fall in with the wrong crowd. They excel at things that require creativity. So if you're doing a group project with this person, they would really make a great presentation. They can do a great job presenting. Not much resistance going to counseling because it's an hour where it's all about them. And they're craving thrills, excitement, and I want everybody to look at me. Probably won't misdiagnose this one if you see it. Narcissism is another one that most of you have probably heard of. So this is a pattern of grandiosity, and I want everybody to notice my greatness. Very egocentric. And you can kind of see a theme between all of these in cluster B, right? Antisocial is all about me. I'm not concerned with how you feel. Borderline is, do things my way. Histrionic is I want the attention, and narcissism is look how great I am. So there can be a lot of overlap, and that's what makes these disorders kind of difficult at times to diagnose, but it's also what makes them really neat. And so these individuals feel that they are uniquely gifted, that they have unacknowledged talents. I'm going to make it big. But they're also very fragile, right? They take criticism very hard. They're not going to show that, right? It might come up in counseling, but they won't show it. They can be very charming, very personable, very social. That drive, that thinking that I'm great, can lead to them actually working really hard, right? That I'm going to climb the ladder. Now they might do some underhanded things if they sense there's some competition. A non-extreme example would be like you can find support groups for children who grew up with parents who had narcissism. If a child comes home and says, I had like the worst day ever, I got bullied and the teacher was mean to me, they'll say, you think you had it bad? Listen to what I had to deal with, right? They have fantasies of success, very egocentric. They are looking to find and make relationships that will benefit them. Like I said, their job performance can be enhanced because they have that drive for success, but their peer relationships can be hindered quite a bit. Moving into the final cluster, we have avoidant personality. Oh, an example of narcissism. It's confounded with his bipolar, but Kanye West. Another, I think, low-key example, low-key, listen to me, is Lance Armstrong would be another really good example. Avoidant personality. So feeling inadequate, socially inhibited. I'm worried about, nobody's going to accept me. Sensitivity to criticism, right? So I wind up interpreting things the wrong way. I don't want to take a course of action that I don't know the outcome. So I'm avoiding negativity. I'm avoiding any possibility that things can go wrong. Don't want to involve myself in situations where I could say something wrong. Few close friends. And this is just really, I'm afraid of making a mistake, right? I'm afraid of doing something wrong. And so let me just avoid all possibilities of doing that. They can get married, they can have relationships, but it takes time. And so think of this term ridicule: restrained relationships, inhibited in interpersonal situations, inadequate view of self, unwilling to get involved, right? This is, I just don't want to mess up, so let me avoid everything. Dependent personality. So abnormally high need to be taken care of, to be accepted. This is someone who will stay in a relationship even when that relationship has run its course, even if it has become violent. Can't be alone. I gotta be with someone. An example of this would, going back to John Michael Meehan, the person he married, the last person who is willing to put up with a tremendous amount of abuse just to be in a relationship. This person has a hard time making decisions, kind of like with avoiding, because I'm afraid of doing the wrong thing. I want someone to make the decision for me. They will put up with abuse, and they'll put up with unhealthy relationships just in order to have someone decide things for them. And our last one, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. This is not the same as OCD. Another way of conceptualizing this is extreme perfectionism, right? This is someone, a better name for it would have been perfectionistic personality disorder. This is someone that I need to have control. Everything has to be just so. It has to be my way or it's no good. Inflexible, controlling, can be assertive to the point of aggression. This is a person who will argue with an expert. In relationships, they can appear high maintenance because everything has to be done their way, right? So that's where the obsessive compulsive, that it has to be done exactly so. In session, they'll be very rigid. They probably have a lot of questions about you because I only want to go to the best counselor and what do you know, and I looked it up and I know this and that. They can be late turning things in. They miss assignments because they keep picking at it, right? They keep changing it, and then because of the fear of not getting it perfect, I now have missed the deadline, right? I think that's going to do it for today on personality disorders. They're really cool. There's a great journal, the Journal of Personality Disorders. I'll post some additional information on Blackboard. I hope this was helpful. Check out the DSM and the criteria for them. And if you want more information, please let me know, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.